know people are going to continue to join us, but I wanted to welcome everyone to this session on educational supports for boys with ALD, be it IEPs, be it 504s. As you guys are probably sick of me by now, I'm Kathleen O'Sullivan-Fort, and I'm with ALD Connect. I have a almost 16-year-old son who has, navigated the school system, and I never realized this was an option. So when this topic came to us through a question from one of the families, I thought, I had no idea. And I was lucky because I know Nicole Metsistso. So I have to tell you, 6 years ago, I moved to a new town, and I had a school age ALD boy, and at the time he was on the Lorenzo's oil trial. And so he had some food restrictions, and I was always kind of never sure how to approach telling people about ALD. But I was fortunate enough that my son was friends with Nicole Metsistso's son, and they were the first family in our town, I really have to say, that welcomed us. It was his birthday party, and she reached out to me and said, I heard John has some dietary concerns. What can I do to help accommodate? And I, of course, was like, no, we'll take care of it. And she said, no, like so generously, no, I want to make this, perfect. Just let me know. So I never forget the kindness of someone. And I hope I'm not treading on that kindness by asking her to present, but she is an expert, a legal expert in terms of educational supports for boys. And then after she presents, we have the Groels, Bill and Kate, who have 3 tremendous accomplished sons, and they have navigated this system. And they're such a resource for all the families in terms of how to and raising these boys. So I will hand it off.
All right. I'm going to go first. And then the girls are going to share real life, real time stories that they've dealt with, which is probably the best thing you can have as someone who's actually handled that. So mine will be more of like what you should be thinking about and what the differences are that maybe you're struggling with. So thank you so much for inviting me to take part in this national conference. It's really an honor to be asked. And as Kathleen said, my name's Nicole Metsistso, and I work as an attorney advocate at Education Consulting, Advocacy, and Legal Services. That's a mouthful. Here in Massachusetts, I practice mainly in the area of education law, and our firm handles a wide range of related issues, including advocating and educating families with 504s and IEPs. And through that process, we even go to team meetings and stuff. A little disclaimer I have to share is the presentation is provided for informational purposes and should not be construed as legal advice. I have to cover myself. That's about me, not you guys. In chatting with Kathleen leading up to the conference, it seems an overview of the similarities and the differences between a 504 and an IEP plan would be helpful to many of you. And so my plan is to outline those differences, share some examples of what you can do, and then if time allows, after the girls go, take some questions and hopefully direct you in the right place. So Section 504. So people refer to a 504 like 504 is the thing. Your 504 plan is actually the document that the school holds. Section 504 is of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. I feel like we're in school and you should take notes on this, but you don't need to. I've actually provided Kathleen with a document that compares and contrasts both of them. And so I'm sure if you want this information, she can get it to you. It's a federal anti-discrimination law, and it protects all people with a disability that impairs one or more of your major life activities, and learning is one of these major life activities. It prohibits discrimination in any program, and it provides accommodations to remove discriminatory barriers. So think about the ramp is providing access to a child into a school with a wheelchair. That's an accommodation. Or a computer access allows a student who maybe can't show what they know one way in a different way. So it's access to education. And that's important because when we're talking about IEPs, it's really that you need the education, the curriculum changed to meet your needs. And that's not what we're talking about with a 504. We're talking about just simply being able to access the education in the same way as all of the other students. And so this 504 plan removes these barriers to learning and opportunities, and think of it as leveling the playing field. So providing equal access, and your children are entitled to FAPE, which if you hear that word, it means a free and appropriate education. And that's true under an IEP and a 504. All children are entitled to FAPE. Um, we have to treat the standard. So this comes up all the time. It's, I want my student to have the best they can be, and that's never the standard, actually. Sadly, it's not the best that they can get. It's what we need to do is to be reasonably accommodating the students conditions so that their needs are as adequately met as those of students without disabilities. So this isn't perfection, right? Because the average student isn't getting a perfect environment just for them. It's got to be reasonable. And the case law sort of defines what reasonable is, and it can be different. It's really based on the facts in each individual case. So if you have questions about that, you could reach out to me or to someone in your area. Um, I practice in Mass, and Massachusetts certainly has really protective laws. So you have like the federal laws, and then Mass goes above that, which is fantastic. um, but if in your state you're not sure, you always have the protection of the federal law, which is good with the 504s. But you may look into where you actually live for what is reasonable in that. The least restrictive environment becomes an important key factor. So we're not isolating the student who has a disability. We want them to be integrated as much as possible. So an example of this, so it makes it sound real life to you, is the kid with the peanut allergy. We can't put him alone in a room so that he's safe eating his snack or his lunch. That is not the least restrictive environment. There's many different ways to sort of facilitate that for him and keep him safe and meet the needs of the other students in the school. And it's important to note that academic modifications may be necessary, even if the life activity that's being affected is not learning. So examples is the PE curriculum can be modified. The school schedule modifications may be necessary, field trips, assemblies. These things need to be determined by the student's individual needs. Even though we're not talking about an IEP or an individualized education plan, we really have to look at each student individually to decide what accommodations are necessary, because you can't just take a kid and say, oh, he has ALD, so these are the accommodations that he needs. You have to look at what specifically is going on for that child. And I know from my chat with Kathleen is it could be a huge wide array of things based on where they are in that diagnosis, or whether they're in the middle of lots of testing, or if the cognitive abilities have been affected, then we are maybe looking at an IEP and that the curriculum needs to be changed versus some of the things that we're going to talk about next. So here's some examples of some accommodations and modifications that may come up for you, and there's probably 1,000 more, but these are just some examples. The ability to leave class when needed. So you're not asking for a pass, you're not having to raise your hand, you can just get up and leave, and that can be documented in the 504 plan. Free access to food and water. Again, there shouldn't be a need to question or make this child feel different or weird if they need that. That can be really true for diabetics. I'm not sure with ALD kids if that's something, but whenever you're dealing with some sort of disability that has to do with illness, you want to take into consideration what's going to make them be the most productive in school. Bathroom privileges, communicating what works for this individual. So this actually came up for me in a different context, and a student was given permission to use the nurse's bathroom only, and that was like the preferential bathroom privilege, but that's actually discriminatory, because what if that child doesn't feel comfortable using the nurse's bathroom because now everyone in the school, say it's an older child, and they're like, everyone knows I'm going to the nurse now and something's wrong with me. So that doesn't work for that child. You have to find a different accommodation that works. And that's on the school, not on the family necessarily, to come up with that accommodation. Preferential seating. And I can't stand when 504 and IEP plans say preferential seating, because that doesn't mean anything to me. I want you to define what preferential seating is for this student. So does this student need to be near the door, or does this student need to be near the front of the room? Preferential seating, if I'm the teacher or the substitute or the gym teacher or whoever I am looking at this, if it just says preferential seating, I'm just skipping over that because I don't know what that means. Put more information in these plans and request that more information is in the plan so it meets the need of your child. Maybe your kid needs the administration of health protocols in the classroom. Maybe he can do it himself, and that can be part of a 504 plan. Additional time to complete assignments without penalty. So this is something we were just chatting before, and the Groel shared. Like, if you're going through a lot of stuff and you're going to the doctor, or if you need to go to the nurse's office and take a break, you shouldn't be penalized for having to take more time than the average student to complete your work. And the same can be true if you're missing days of school for doctor's appointments to fill health related needs and doctor's appointments. And this can come into attendance. And it's okay to have in the 504 spelled right out that your child's not going to be penalized for missing school due to things that need to be dealing with their disability. So those are just a couple that I thought would maybe be helpful in relation really to what all of you are facing. And if there's others you want to discuss, I'm happy to do that. So let's compare this a little bit. We have already, but with the IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, also a federal law, but it's an education law. It's not all encompassing, covers all people sort of thing. It's really directed at kids ages 3 to 22. It's for students with at least one of the 13 qualifying categories. That's a federal thing, the 13. Massachusetts actually only has 10. And that's not because our law supersedes it. It's that we encompass those 13 within our 10 and probably actually provide a little more coverage. And I also provided Kathleen with this flow chart, and it actually lists the Massachusetts ones. And you can print that off and have it, because this is really helpful, because the question I get the most is, everyone says I need an IEP, a 504 is not good enough. And that may not be the case. Not everyone with a disability qualifies for a 504, and not everyone with a disability qualifies for an IEP. And when I say that, I mean, your child may not need accommodations to access education, and your child may not have a disability that means that they have to have their curriculum altered. So it really depends on the child and where they are right now. It sounds like most kids going through are having ALD need a 504, but maybe don't need an IEP. So this flow chart is how you get there. It's how you sort of determine. You have to go one box to the next, and it sort of takes you through it. Children with disabilities who need specialized instruction and specialized support, that's where you get into the IEP. And it's individualized. It has to really be individualized to the students. And the main difference from a 504 and IEP is that you have this document, and it is more closely reviewed every year. You have to have measurable goals, and they need to be collecting data. And that doesn't always happen with a 504, because they're not sort of doing the same thing. But that doesn't mean that you couldn't be collecting data and doing some similar things with a 504, if that's what your child specifically needs. So in either case, whether it's a 504 or an IEP, a team needs to be meeting to sort of make this determination. I hear all the time, I went to my child's school and they said I don't need a 504. Well, that's not how these decisions are made. A team of people needs to sit down. And typically when you say I need a team meeting to a school, they're thinking you need an IEP team meeting. So they quickly say, oh, no, you don't, because you have a 504. But you can have a team, a 504, and maybe that's what you should say. I want my 504 team to meet. It's usually made up of different people than an IEP team is. But this whole team should meet to make the determination of whether the child needs a 504 plan or an IEP. And it should be based on information that you provide. So with an IEP, it's very specific what information and what people need to be there. it's like mandated. And with a 504, it's a little looser. It's not as clearly defined who needs to be at this, but it's also known to be the best practice to have that include the parent, because I tell every single one of my clients, you as the parent are your child's best advocate, and you have the information that needs to be shared with the team. Um, but it can also be doctor's notes, doctor's information. It could be things that the school have seen. All of this information is what comes into play to make a determination of whether this child needs a 504 plan or whether further evaluation needs to be done, maybe psychological, cognitive, educational testing to determine whether the next step would be to have a full IEP team and decide if that's what's necessary. But you have an equal voice at that table, and that is important to know. And I know most parents don't feel like that because it feels like a foreign language is being spoken. And so you just trust what the school is saying to you. And so that's where people can get into. So how do you avoid that? How do you avoid getting into that sort of thing? Two things are so important. Communication is the first. And I mean like strong communication. Kat was so fortunate in that she didn't ever run into this because she's an excellent communicator. And so she communicated her needs to the school. And I know the school because my kids have been there, and she did a great job because it's not always easy. We don't happen to have, like, we have a great school, but it's not because they were so great that Kat got what she needed. She communicated effectively what John needed. And so the school made it happen. And you need to do that. You need to model for them what you expect back. Like, this is how this is going to go, and whatever. And you need to protect relationships. So there's so many pieces in this, and you need to protect your kid and you need to protect the teacher, but you all need to be working together to make sure the best is happening. You need to ask open-ended questions. Help me understand why you're saying this to me and why this can't be the way that we do it. It's a back and forth. Be responsive. This is so frustrating from the school side of it, is like, you do get into this and then a parent says they're going to do this. You need to follow up and follow through on your end as well as the parent, because that can start the breakdown of that relationship. Share your information and your ideas. You are the ALD experts. You need to inform them, and you need to share what works at home so that they can make this learning environment the best, not the best, but as reasonable as it can be. And you want your child to value the school. So if you're frustrated with your school, I know it's hard because I do this with my own kids. You need to try to shield them from that and encourage them to value the school and the people that they're working with at school, and sort of keep that frustration that's going on for you, like, from them. Try to be proactive and not reactive. Super hard sometimes when dealing with the school. I understand that. These are just tips to make it better. Keep the team informed of your concerns. They may change, right? So your child is going through this, and what was a concern at the last meeting may have shifted crazy town from a last doctor's appointment or from whatever's going on now. Keep them updated on that, and that, yeah, that was my concern 2 weeks ago when we met, but that is not my number one at this point, and they need to know. Thank you and I'm sorry goes a long way, and letting things go and focusing on where are we right now. It's so hard. I don't even represent myself at my kids' meetings because I can't be an effective advocate. I have to play mom because sometimes it's hard to let go of what has happened. You want to get it all out there, but you did this wrong and this wrong and this wrong. Where are we today? There's a place in these meetings to vent some of that, because it's important for them to know that you're sharing that, to share that there's a breakdown in the relationship. But then you have to be at the table like, but here we are right now, and we all have to be a part of this team for my child. And how do we do that? And how do we move forward? So that's sort of just like a keep in the back of your mind. And if communication is number one, number two is documentation. Here's a little quote I found: if it was never written, it was never said, and it will never be done. And there's an exception. Kathleen has some stories that are the exception to that. I do too, but that's the rule of thumb to live by. If it's not in writing, it doesn't even matter. It's not even a part of the process. And you hopefully never go to hearing on these. And if it's a 504 issue, you'd be taking it to the Office of Civil Rights. And if it's an IEP issue, you might be ending up at your state Board of Special Ed Appeals with a hearing. You never want to end up there, but you want to be documenting the whole way through like you're preparing for that. So put it in writing. If you have a phone call with someone, when you get off the phone, write them an email that says, "Thank you for your time. It is my understanding that what we discussed today was X, Y, and Z. If I'm incorrect in this, please correct me." If they don't correct you, even if they do correct you, your understanding of that is now documented. It is now officially part of what goes on. Just keeping a notebook for you, not as effective if you get to hearing. It's helpful if you've done that consistently. After every single phone call, a hearing officer will look at it and say, this parent documented every conversation, but it's the consistency of that. If you do it once and never again, then that document gets tossed out. So this is just so important because there's so many cases and there's so many kids. And if nothing else you take away is that to learn how to document effectively for yourself so that you have that when you get to that point, it's super important. So that's what I have, tips and tricks. And I know the roles are going to share like real life what this looks like.
Are we live? We're live. Okay.
All right, I guess we'll get started. Just a little intro. I'm Kate, and this is my husband, Bill, and we are parents to 3 awesome guys. Connor is 21, Carson's 19, and Clancy is 14. Connor and Clancy were both born with the biochemistry for ALD. I have a history of ALD in my family, so because of that, we knew to test our kids at birth. So essentially, we found out at 3 days old that they were positive for adrenoleukodystrophy by testing cord blood. We were really fortunate to know about ALD from birth. That's a blessing that my parents were not given. My brother lost his battle to ALD back in 1979 when he was 8 years old. I always bring my brother into any discussion with ALD because I like to say that he didn't die in vain. And because of him, we knew to be proactive with our boys. So pretty early on, we were part of the Lorenzo's oil study, and we were lucky to be monitored by Dr. Raymond and the awesome team at Kennedy Krieger Institute. Connor started Lorenzo's oil when he was 4.5. Clancy started when he was 18 months. Both of our boys, Carson is the one in the middle. He does not have ALD. So when we're talking here, we're referring to Connor and Clancy, the oldest and the youngest. Both of them do have adrenal insufficiencies and are cortisone dependent. We monitor them still to this day every 6 months with MRIs, and we see the plethora of doctors that most people in the ALD study see. We thought we were doing totally everything that we needed to be handling, the potential time bomb that is ALD. But when Clancy, who's now 14, was entering kindergarten, we had just moved to a new school district, and I received a call from the vice principal, and she said she was looking through my paperwork and she noticed that I have a child that was diagnosed with adrenoleukodystrophy and wanted to know if I was interested in setting up something called a 504 for him. Honestly, at this point, Connor was in 7th grade and I had never heard of a 504.
What is that?
So I kind of said to Bill, oh, how sweet of this teacher. She must think that Clancy's in a wheelchair, or she must think that he's learning disabled, or that he has some sort of special needs. Once she sees that he's, quote unquote normal, of course, we're not going to qualify for this. Boy, was I wrong. And I was really thankful to have that teacher, that vice principal get in touch with me and kind of explain it to me. And I realized right at that point that Connor needed to be on one also. So you might be wondering what is a 504, and if you were listening to Nicole, she did a much better job than I would of explaining what a 504 is. But basically, we look at it as a way of protecting anybody that has a disability. It's designed for parents of students with physical or mental impairments in public school to work together for an educational plan that ensures your kids will be treated fairly. Sounds right. Sounds good, right? So off the bat, we would encourage anybody in the ALD community to consider a 504 for sure. It's given us, I guess I'll explain some of the things that I feel that it's been most beneficial to our family for. And the number one thing is it's given us a platform to really explain what ALD is. As we all know, in our ALD community, most people have never heard of adrenoleukodystrophy. And they certainly don't understand the seriousness of it. We like to explain ALD in the simplest way that we can when we're talking to the schools so that they understand exactly what it is. We usually do this by, in the beginning of the school year, I send out an email to everybody that's going to be involved with our kids, whether that be their teachers, their counselors, the school nurse, their coaches, the school trainer, anybody that they're in touch with. I do that before my 504, so they're already aware of the situation before I go in. And then the 504 usually happens in the beginning of the school year.
You mean your 504 meeting? Is that when you say?
Oh, yes, sorry. So you might be wondering, or people might be wondering, like, who attends a 504? We found that it's different according to the age of our kids or the school that they're in. It's usually always the counselor, a vice principal, a 504 coordinator, and a teacher or two. We've had at some times that the school nurse has been in attendance. And we've had certain years, like Clancy's first year of junior high, where he had like 8 different teachers. That year, they scheduled my appointment before school so that every teacher could be there. They said, this is something super rare. We've never heard of it before. We want everybody to be in on the meeting. So
that's an example of an amazing school.
Yeah, it was awesome. And then as my kids have gotten older, once they've hit high school, our school district has always said it was on them to have to help self-advocate. So then at that point, they've been invited to be in on the 504 meetings as well. That didn't start until high school. So we all know once our kids go to school, they spend more time with their teachers and at school than they do with us at home. So for us, it was really important for them to understand ALD and what symptoms they were looking for at the 504. And, you know, God forbid if they were ever to get a bad MRI, the last thing that any of us in the ALD community would be thinking of would, hey, let's call the school and set up a plan. No, that's going to be the last thing on our mind. So for me, it really put our minds at ease to know that our school was already going to be on board. God forbid anything were to happen. So people might be thinking, Nicole went over some stuff, but they might be thinking like, well, what do I put in my 504? The answer really is anything you think your child will need. You can customize your 504 as the years go on. But for an example, when our boys were on the Lorenzo Zoyo, as Kathleen had said, her son was as well, they're on a super restricted low-fat diet. So I had put in my 504 that I wanted to be the snack parent. So that way it was a really easy way that I could bring in something healthy that my boys could enjoy, that the whole class could also partake in, so that it was a way that they could feel not left out of like the party treats. The other kids in the class never took note that my brownies were fat-free. Everybody ate the brownies and it was awesome. Everybody was included. My kids or our kids felt normal. So that was kind of a win. I don't know if all school districts would allow that. At least you'd want to know that like if there's a school party and you're not allowed to bring in for everybody, that you are allowed to do a separate treat for your own child, then would be, you know, so that they're not forced to just have nothing if it's a high fat treat. Yep. We all know that kids with ALD should avoid high saturated foods, and we all know what kind of treats are brought in for school parties. So it's really nice if you have the option to be able to bring in a healthy treat that
Yeah.
everybody can enjoy. So
Yeah.
that was something we did.
And there were definitely times when the teachers, once they felt informed, at least I think we always felt they were on the lookout, even in these, minor situations with a snack. You'd get a call or an email from a teacher that, hey, it's, little Johnny's birthday on Friday and something's going to happen. And how do you want
Right.
to handle,
They did always,
Clancy or
that's a good idea. I forgot about that.
anything like that.
They did do that. So I would actually bring like a box of Rice Krispie treats and leave them in the classroom so that I knew that that was a low fat but treat Clancy really enjoyed. So if it was like an individual birthday party and I didn't want him having the treat that was offered, that he had the Rice Krispie treats, so he didn't have to have anything. But sometimes the teacher would call and she'd say, they're cupcakes. Let me read you the label on the back and then you let me know.
Mhm.
So it's really a great way to be able to, for communication.
I'll just chime in with the food stuff, is because the schools have to know how to deal with allergies, they should
Mhm.
treat it very similarly. And
Mhm.
so that would be a case where you definitely would want the nurse involved in the 504 planning.
Mhm.
And there's in addition to the 504 plan, for kids with allergies, there needs to be a health plan with the nurse's office. And that can be a piece of that if anything is going to be served outside of like what you send or what's served at school that you have approved, it may not be in the 504, it can be referenced in the 504, but that you get to have an overview of ingredients of something. I mean, I know that schools have become much better about this than even like say 5 years ago, with encouraging healthier snacks, and those options are usually on the list, but this is a very good point. Thank you for bringing that up. That's so true.
Well,
So-
the next thing that we were thinking was if they're cortisone dependent, like our two boys are, this was a doozy for me because I always wanted to be the parent. I would always want to rearrange my schedule to be the parent that goes on the field trip. Because God forbid anything were to happen, I had the emergency meds. I'm the one that felt comfortable to give them. And I remember Clancy was in like first grade and they said, oh, sorry, you weren't picked out of the hat to be the parent that goes on the field trip. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I was a little panicked about it, but I'm like, I just have to stay calm. They were going, we live in a suburb of Houston, and they were taking a bus an hour away downtown Houston to see a play. So he was going to be on a bus going an hour away. He was my baby, so it made me anxious to think, what if the bus, something happened, there was an accident, whatever. So I ended up coming to find that the parent that was, and I told them everything that I really wanted to be there. And they said, sorry, we only have one extra ticket. You weren't picked. The next thing I knew, I got an email and it said, oh, the parent that was originally picked couldn't go. So now the new parent that's going is X. And I'm like, well, why wasn't I the new parent? So I send the teacher a note and she goes, well, we put the names in the hat again and you weren't picked again. And I was like, oh my gosh, like it really surprised me. And I appreciate that they did it fairly, but I was a little bit like baffled by that. So I'm like, that's something to put in my 504, that if the need arises that they're going on a trip and I need to be a parent that goes there so that someone's aware if something happens, that I know how to administer the emergency meds and whatnot for my child. So I put that in my 504, and most of the time, the school from that point on really, really appreciated it because they were very happy that they didn't have to be nervous about who would handle Clancy's medical needs, that the mom would be there. So that ended up being okay.
So on that one, it's interesting, and every state's going to be different on this. Although this is a federal thing, I'd actually be interested to read the case law specifically, because the school cannot require a parent to attend a field trip. Kathleen's laughing because she's like, I went on every field trip and they told me I had to, or John couldn't go. And I was like, ah! The school cannot require a parent to go on a field trip with a kid for a disability. It is the school's responsibility to have a nurse go on that field trip with that child to be able to administer the thing. They try to get out of that expense by saying, can you go? And most parents are happy to. In your case, you want to be the one that goes, and that's fine. But you could also see other parents getting upset. I never get to go on the school field trip. And here's where we get into this reasonableness and what becomes reasonable. So I don't know that every school district would allow you to go on every field trip. It's because what the law says is it's the school's responsibility to provide someone to be able to handle that child's medical situation, and not to be able to ban them from going on the field trip, and not to require you to go on the field trip, because what if you're not in the fortunate position that you can go because your work allows that? And so that's where the law protects it. And the only reason I'm chiming in is because this is an issue that Kathleen and I discussed, and it is one that parents are like, I have to take off work. And of course, when you're talking about your first grader going an hour away, like that's just scary all by itself. As a parent, if your first kid's going on a bus and going to, like for us, Boston, we all want to go on that field trip, but yours is up here because your child has this additional need. And I wonder, like, if they had said, but the school nurse is going, or most districts are supposed to have another nurse, whether it's their sub nurse or someone else that they can hire for the day to go on the field trip. That is what their job is. If it's an overnight camp here in our town, it's a 6th grade camp. Nurses for each of the children who need that have to go. They cannot encourage you to not have your child participate. That is against federal law. That is discrimination.
Yeah.
I would say that when that year came up for us, at first they told me that I was going to have to go. And I said, do parents go on the trip? And they said, no, you're not invited on the trip. They suggested that I go and stay in a motel nearby the trip and make myself available. I know Nicole's mind is going to explode. They had suggested that I go and kind of lurk and hover. I just wanted to point out, the chat is blowing up. We have Suzanne Flynn is a school nurse, and she's horrified because she said the nurse has to go. It's the law. They have to provide a nurse. And I also wanted just to let you guys know, we only have a few minutes left.
Okay.
Just before
Okay.
we get cut off.
I'm not bad. My school has been awesome with all of this, and they've made wonderful accommodations for me. So yeah, I might be shaky on on my school made it work for us.
And that's great. And that's the bottom line, is if it's working for you, then that's fine, but it can't be required of you.
Right. So I'll just go really fast on the couple other things that we thought was important to add in them for our boys. That they're gonna be missing school occasionally for MRIs, doctor appointments, blood work. All of that's really good to have in writing. Although I've always prefaced it by saying, listen, I'm never going to have them miss school unless they have to, unless that's the only option. Other possibilities are like similar things to what Nicole had said: unlimited bathroom trips, visits to the nurse, allowance of water all day. You fit the 504 to your needs. But to me, it's most important in that meeting to let them know that ALD is like a time bomb, and we never know when or if it could go off. So they need to be looking for possible symptoms: not paying attention, not seeing the board, not hearing things properly, tripping, grades dropping, general changes in ability, motor skills, personality. We all know catching ALD early is so important. Teachers need to be vigilant in watching your child and reporting anything that seems off. I advise putting all of that in a 504. If your child's cortisone dependent, it needs to be noted in the 504 as well, and medication and directions for administering should be explained to the school nurse or trainer, or sometimes you even get a willing teacher. That's about everything that I can think that we have. If anyone is interested in seeing a copy of like a typical letter that we've sent over the years, I can totally reach out or reach out to me, and we can totally make that available.
Kate, someone has asked both of you, does anyone include social work in their plan? And is school social work, is that appropriate for a 504 meeting? Is that appropriate to add to a plan?
I saw the question. So often in schools, the social worker happens to also be the 504 coordinator. So I wasn't sure, are they asking if that person should be at the meeting or if that should be a part of the plan that that child see the social worker on a regular basis? So I was confused by the question. So sometimes the social worker's there, and that's totally great because they may need to provide emotional support for the kiddo, like, or the school may be thinking that that's what they need because they may be feeling different or something. But often the social worker happens to also be the school's 504 coordinator, and that's why you'll see them there. In terms of whether they should be on the plan, it's going to depend on the individual kid and what they're thinking they need in terms of accommodation.
And if a parent feels that they should be involved,
Then
maybe
you
they
could
have a young
request that they
child.
be at the 504 meeting. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's, if you have a young child who's not sure how to explain what their situation is, and if it's maybe that social work, this mom feels like social work might be value added in
Yes.
terms of.
Then yes, then definitely. And if it's not a school social worker, maybe that's not what your school calls it. They may call it adjustment counselor, or they may call it something else, but there should be someone in that role who's providing emotional support to students. Every school calls it something different, every state, every district. So you want to look at who's sort of in that role. The Groels also brought up your child attending the meeting. The schools have to tell you that your child can go at a certain point, and it's not appropriate for all kids. So you have to decide that too. If your kid really wants to be there because they feel like they have a good handle on how to advocate best for themselves, then it's fine. But they are not required. The district is required to invite them, but you as the parents are not required to have them go.
Excellent. Well, we are just a minute or two over. I'm feverishly trying to read the chat. Kate, I have an email that I will forward to you for someone who would love that 504 letter and the letter you're giving. Again, to everyone, I mentioned in the chat box, if you didn't see it, we have the ability to capture all the emails of people who attended this session. And so we will be sending these materials out in just one fell swoop. So Kate, if you want to send me the letter, I can take care of all that. And then also, once this video is loaded up on the website, all of the supporting materials will be listed there as well. So I want to thank you all so much. I think we've answered a lot of questions, started a lot of discussions. And
I saw people asking for a sample 504 plan. I know the Groels are sharing their letter of how they approach that. I believe the Office of Civil Rights, or your state's sort of overseeing of that, they will have sample 504 plans for your area or your district that you can maybe print off. And if you can't find one, I'm happy to find one and send it to Kat for you guys to look at. But know that they're going to be different everywhere. This will just be sort of like a basic, what they might look like.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you, everyone.
Nicole.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Time to move on to the next presentation.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.